Hello, this is part 5 in my 5-part series called What is Bitcoin? In the first part, we talked about what is Bitcoin, and in part 2, how did Bitcoin start? We talked in depth about that. And in part 3, what is a Bitcoin blockchain? And in part 4, what is Bitcoin mining? This is part 5, and we'll be talking about two things: what gives Bitcoin its value, and why should I own Bitcoin. So if you find that interesting, join me at the other side of this dramatic intro. Hello, this is Tom Brickhouse with Growth Matrix. That's right, I said Growth Matrix. If you have watched the previous installments of What is Bitcoin, you may have noticed that my dramatic intro has changed from alternate increase to Growth Matrix. The reason for that is that I wanted to broaden my focus, not to just be on Bitcoin, but on other ways to grow, both financially and personal. So there's a link I'll share to a video that explains that more. But at any rate, welcome to Growth Matrix. Okay, so let's get started with part 5 of What is Bitcoin and talk about what gives Bitcoin its value. Just what makes it worth anything. Well, fundamentally, Bitcoin derive their value just like anything else because people want them. Like anything else, any other currency, Bitcoin follows the basic rules of supply and demand. And Bitcoin derives its unique value from the fact that despite its lack of official backing or wide acceptance at this point, it has generated its own ecosystem in which many people are willing to trade and accept it. And because there is a cap on the total number of Bitcoins that will ever exist, this currency cannot be devalued through inflation as other currencies can. Now, let me go through these and unpack this a little bit. The first 3 bullets deal mainly with supply and demand. And fiat currencies derive their value from supply and demand, but those are dictated by the governments that back them. It used to be that currencies were backed by precious metals, but those days are long gone. And one of the attractive things about Bitcoin is that they are not backed by a central authority like a bank. So you have the fiat currencies, and their value is dictated by the central banking system or government. In the United States, it's the Federal Reserve. They can print money at will, and they can raise and lower interest rates, which affect the market. And that ultimately dictates the value of the money. If they lower the interest rates then and increase the supply, then the stock market goes up. If they tighten the money supply and raise the interest rate, the stock market goes down. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, as we've showed in previous videos, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer decentralized currency. So one person sends Bitcoin through the blockchain to another person on the receiving end. And there is no central agency or government that dictates the value. So the value is dictated by supply and demand only. Now, we talked about mining Bitcoin, and that's part of it, because as the remaining Bitcoin are released and mined and uncovered, so to speak, by miners, the supply will increase. and there'll be more Bitcoin in circulation. But the Bitcoin protocol dictates that only 21 million Bitcoins will ever be produced and put into circulation. So what this means is that as the demand increases, the price, the value of each Bitcoin will increase. There are some who are speculating that it could go as high as $100,000 per Bitcoin in the future. Also, there's, even though 80% of the total Bitcoins have been mined and put into circulation at this recording, that still, leaves 20%. Doesn't seem like much, but because of the way the protocol is written, it will take, they are estimating, to the year 2040 for all of the Bitcoin to be mined. What that means is, as of this recording, there are 11 years approximately that Bitcoins will be mined and uncovered. So the value of Bitcoin is not dictated, orchestrated, manipulated by any central authority. It's pure peer-to-peer and supply and demand. And it is my belief that this will only go up. Keep watching for the other section, and we'll talk about why you should buy Bitcoin. Okay, so let's look at the question, why should I own Bitcoin? We'll talk about price correction of late has brought Bitcoin to a healthy valuation. Bitcoin has proven it is reliable and it can scale. Crypto is becoming mainstream with Bitcoin in the forefront. Securities will bring institutional money and the masses. The trend to get rid of cash is worldwide. The global economy is on borrowed time. And market sentiment is low, and that's the time we should be bold. So let's take a closer look at these. First, let's look at the price correction that has happened in 2018 that has brought Bitcoin to a healthier valuation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at two charts. This chart is Bitcoin against the US dollar. Its valuation in terms of US dollar. And this is a weekly chart, meaning that each of these candles, they call them, represents a week of price action in Bitcoin. And this is taken from, it's 104 weeks from 1/2/17 to 12/24/2018. And as you can see, that according to this measuring tool we use, that in that period of time, in 2 years, if you would have bought Bitcoin back here and had just held on to it, it gained 376%. It did spike up to almost $20,000 at the end of 2017. And all of 2018 has seen a bear market and price correction. But still, and this also proves its stability, it has gained over 376% in that time. This chart is the Dow Jones Industrial. And in the same period of time, if you had bought it back here and held it to when this video was recorded and when this screenshot was taken, you will see that you would have had a 17.25 increase. And this market also went through a major uptick, a major bull run, and then kind of leveled out, and then lately it has fallen and corrected. So you can see that Bitcoin is now, even though people are saying, oh, it's going to go to zero and so forth, Bitcoin is actually at a reasonable valuation and a high evaluation, considering it's only been around for 10 years. Now the next bullet point is Bitcoin has proven it's reliable and it can be scaled. And here's two articles that I found. There's many others out there. One asset is shockingly stable during the market sell-off this week, and it's Bitcoin, and that's from CNBC. And from CCN, which is Crypto Coin News, Bitcoin transaction fees hit 3-year low as Lightning Network SegWit help Bitcoin scale. Now I'll link to both these articles as well as my main source. You see up here in the description below. I'll put that in. But the important part of this is that, as I showed in the charts, Bitcoin is very stable, more stable actually than the Dow. And also, this article here mentions that the fees have hit all-time lows, and something called Lightning Network and SegWit are helping Bitcoin scale. And Lightning Network is a layer, so to speak, of coding that will enable you to go like to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee with a portion of Bitcoin, with a very small piece of Bitcoin. Even if Bitcoin is at $10,000, $20,000 a Bitcoin, you'll still be able to do these quick purchases. And that is being developed, and it's very promising and is enabling Bitcoin to be what they call scalable. Now, crypto is becoming mainstream term now, and Bitcoin is at the forefront. A few years ago, nobody even heard of Bitcoin. Like I've said before, it's only been around for 10 years. But within the last couple of years, it's become a mainstream recognition, even though most people don't understand it or know how it works. And that's the reason I'm doing these What is Bitcoin video series. But it has become more mainstream. Most people at least have heard of it, even though they don't know what it is. Securities will bring institutional money and the masses into Bitcoin. And what that's talking about is that there are what they call index funds that people are trying to get approved. There are traders, institutional trading platforms. There's one called Backed that is scheduled to start sometime in early 2019 that will hold actual Bitcoin for traders, and this will be institutional traders, to trade the market, sort of like the Forex market does with Bitcoin involved. And that will bring in more interest for the institutional investors. Now, being a Bitcoin purist as I am, I really don't believe that that's necessary for the institutions to get involved, but it will bring awareness and it'll bring more people into it. So it is a bullish phenomenon that is liable to help take Bitcoin to higher levels in 2019. And the trend to get rid of cash is worldwide, and we're probably all, are involved in that. People say, well, Bitcoin isn't real, it's just digital. It's not even, it's virtual. Well, so is your money. And most of the time, we're using a card. Whoever thought 5 years ago that you would be able to stick a card, a debit card, into a machine and buy a hamburger or a hot dog? And personally, I've fallen into this where I very seldom have cash in my pocket. I use virtual money. In my case, Federal Reserve notes. So that we know that trend is there. We know it's coming. And so the general public to accept a digital currency such as Bitcoin is becoming more and more plausible. This may be the most important one on the list, and that is the global economy is on borrowed time. And here are just a few headlines that I found. I'll put on my headline voice here. Global markets in worst year since 2008. IMF warns storm clouds are gathering for next financial crises. Are you ready for the financial crisis of 2019? Clouds gathering over global economy. The global economy is already on an irreversible path to a downturn, Nomura says. I kind of blew that last one. But the point is, these are from various sources. BBC News, twice, BBC News, the New York Times, The Guardian, and Business Insider. And there's a lot of angst and worry about the economy right now. And I'll link to all these again in the description below. But the fact is that the whole economic banking system, and I'll probably do a separate video on that, is just a Ponzi scheme. The banking cartel, I would call them, have controlled the world economy for decades. And what they do is just wrong, and it will eventually come down because it's just a huge house of cards, and it's only going to take a couple of sparks to bring the whole thing down. So with that in mind, with all these things pending, I don't want to use fear tactics, but Bitcoin just may be a way to circumvent future economic calamity. It's happening in Venezuela. Their economy's gone to just shambles. Inflation rate like hundreds of thousands of %. And people over there are fleeing to Bitcoin in record numbers because they see that it is not being manipulated by any central authority such as their government or a central bank. And finally, market sentiment is low, and that's the time to be bold. And what that means is when most people are really down on something in the market and are bashing it and don't think it's really going to happen or it's going to last, it's just a flash in the pan, that's usually when the people who are bold and get into something at relatively lower levels, they're the ones that make out in the future. I mean, just think if you had bought Apple when it was like $60 a share. This is the kind of thing we're talking about. There are experts who are boldly proclaiming that Bitcoin could reach 50, 100,000 or more in the future. So that's why I think everyone should endeavor to own at least one Bitcoin. Because 10 years from now, it'll be very difficult to buy one Bitcoin. So that's it for this video. And if you liked it, I'd appreciate if you click that like button below and hit the little bell so you can get updates and notifications whenever I do post a new video. So thanks for watching, and also there are links to the other videos in this series. And so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.